Okay, so right now talking about disruption is really difficult and profound because you've got major global shifts happening with a major European war, a fairly significant Chinese lockdown across major export and manufacturing hubs, rising inflation, and the reduction of deficits in the US and the increasing deficits across Europe as a consequence of the fiscal stimuluses that they've launched over the last few years. And I think you've got to look at those things in context. China and the disruption of the supply chain is likely to continue for at least the next 18 months. And then you've got to look at what impact that's having on the long-term trends in demographics in China. They now clearly are locked into a long-term aging population and not replacing their surplus labour capacity. The policies of one child, one family have been replaced by incentives to have 3 children, and still the long-term demographics are not being addressed successfully. That's going to have a big impact on both demand and the way the Chinese economy structures itself. The next big trend is going to be the green economy and the price of energy. If you're in the manufacturing or mining sector, this is likely to become a really big cost in your thought process over the next few years. We know that within South Africa, the availability of energy, let alone its pricing, is constraining economic growth. And I think that the next big one is continuing digital disruption, including the AI and robotics. So you've got big social and financial trends disrupting your marketplace, and you have to look at them in terms of what they will mean for your business. Rising interest rates, rising inflation will lead to greater wage demands, which will put pressure on productivity, and that's something we haven't looked at during COVID at all. So it's difficult to tie it down to one or two major fundamental changes, but to break it down into 3 big groups: what will happen around the financial structure of the world, what will happen around COVID and China in particular, and then what will happen around the green economy and digital disruption. That's quite a difficult question to answer, but I think you have to go back to the basics. Why are they in distress? If it's because they haven't addressed their digital and media strategies in the past, so if you're a large media company such as the SABC and you haven't fully addressed digital disruption, one could argue you are already history. Content and distribution will be the next big disruptors. If you are, as I said, in media, what content are you producing, who's consuming it, how's it being done? You've got TikTok, Twitter, and all of those other things, and now the multiverse coming along in gaming. And those are disrupting new markets and emerging markets amongst millennials. And it's a very, very different space right now. So if you look at things like digital investments, are you going to look at things like what is the impact of geomapping? What is the impact of drone technology? If you look at some of the big projects around what drones are doing in the world today, apart from crop sustainability, they're trying to re-green large parts of the world using drones. Those are big economies driven by a digital tool that is providing a real required service. So you really need to break down as to what is going on in your marketplace and how is digitization and technology driving its changes. So it isn't just about digital investments, it's about digital technologies. If you're in the media space, you can have a look at 2 really big drivers. Netflix subscriptions are ducking and the share price halved by 25% in one day. What drove that? The subscription model is not sustainable. Multiple subscriptions. If you look at the acquisition of Twitter right now by Elon Musk, he didn't do that because he believes in free speech. He did that because he believes it can be properly commercialized. And if you need a really clear indication of why that is so, just have a look at his current statements around what's holding up the acquisition. He's saying he wants to make sure that no more than 5% of the subscribers to Twitter are bots and the like, because it impacts the revenue models that they've projected. So the other big thing around digital disruption is multinational business models and the way they are going to redefine their business models. I think COVID and the digital disruption gave them a big opportunity to reassess their business from a geographic structure to a processed global structure, more than they may have done in the past. That's going to have a big impact on banking, science and technology, less so on the social investments and social side of businesses such as retail. Those always tend to be localized to a greater extent. And I think the other big disruptor is going to be distribution channels and channels to market. So you won't have large shopping centers being built in the future. The current ones are really struggling to get footfall and people in, because distribution using a retail model has been wildly disrupted during COVID and is unlikely to recover fully. The very nature of the products they offer and the processes they employ to market and create product value have fundamentally changed in the digital world and will continue to. So, do you need billboards if you've got direct marketing via Facebook? As a simple example. Well, I think partly historic trends after every major global disruption, whether that was the pandemic of 1918 or the Second World War, you've had a sort of pent-up demand and a normal human energy that requires social interaction and relatively safe environments to express yourself, whether that's an outing to a shopping center, a restaurant, a family meeting, going on holiday, exotic travel, sports events. That's certainly one thing that will drive a lot of end user consumption. I think the other big part of it is clearing bottlenecks, social interactions, and things like the Great Resignation, death and incapacity created by COVID itself have led to a lot of sudden upward mobility. If the world's lost 5 million people, many of them were productively employed. It creates a lot of disruption within businesses, and particularly because COVID had a large impact on your maturing end of your business, with senior executives and senior managers being very affected. You've got a sudden pull through of new talent, and that will create its own energy and dynamic in those organizations. And then, of course, the other big disruptor, I think, is going to be the very sciences that COVID engendered. The ways of treatment, the ways Medicare, the ability to provide medical treatment over digital platforms. All of those big disruptors will drive a lot of growth. And of course, the other part of it is that people have now recognized the need to move to the green economy faster, come out of COVID. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic. I think the countervailing forces to that is in the rising inflation rates across the world, the global food shortages caused by the Russian-Ukrainian war, and of course the ongoing droughts in places like California and Central and Southeast Asia. It's not. I mean, you've had such a lot of disruption, and that's resulted in a lot of changed ways of working, changed customer needs, and those changes aren't yet formalized, and yet they've been disrupted again by the return to work the normalization post-COVID in some economies, once again rising inflation, the green economy are creating new disruptions. So the value creation plan itself is still in a dynamic state of flux. But it comes back down to revenue. If your revenue is secure, then you cost fit to achieve your financial objectives and strategies. So I think that there will be a lot of cost fitting and productivity improvements. You are going to see a lot of hard cost reductions as businesses return to work, and their processes have been streamlined by COVID. A banker recently said, the banks played a role in providing a shock absorber during COVID. That shock absorber is going to be rolled back, and those shocks are going to cause companies to reevaluate their cost structures. That will lead to new alliances, new business models, new ways of working, and new opportunities, and will in turn drive growth. The cost cutting is always a result of a drive towards productivity, and that always leads to creativity. So I'm quite certain that if you look at your business value creation and you look at how you partner and work in social networks rather than just looking at your hard costs, you are going to be able to create a much more sustainable, lower cost base model going forward. Well, turnaround professionals really have to deal with three elements in your business. One is, what is your revenue model, and how sustainable is that? And two, what is your value creation infrastructure needed to support that? And three, what is the state of health in your balance sheet? And I think that turnaround professionals will have to deal with all three of those issues over the next 2 years. How do they drive revenues and enable companies to drive revenues? How do they enable companies to reduce their costs and introduce new ways of working? And how do they refinance balance sheets? That's a broad consultancy role, much more than a business rescue type role. So those turnaround professionals that focus on those various segments will do better than those that are just general practitioners.